When Marcus pulled the injured dog from the busy highway, he thought he was just doing what any decent person would do, but the tearful woman who claimed her wasn't just any owner, and her gratitude would change his family's life in ways he never imagined. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story, and leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear your story too. The rejection still burned in Marcus Rivera's chest as he gripped the steering wheel of his '98 Ford pickup, the engine rattling like loose change in a coffee can. The interview had lasted all of 12 minutes long, enough for the site foreman to glance at his resume, notice the 3-month gap in employment, and deliver the same polite dismissal he'd heard 6 times this month. "We'll be in touch," the man had said, already looking past Marcus toward the next candidate waiting in the trailer. Marcus checked the dashboard clock and cursed under his breath. 4:47 p.m. Tyler's after-school program ended at 5:30, and he was still 20 minutes out, assuming traffic cooperated. It wouldn't, of course nothing had cooperated lately. The late pickup would cost him another $10 in fees, money that was supposed to go toward groceries this week. He pressed the accelerator, coaxing a few more miles per hour from the truck, despite the way it shuddered in protest. The rain had started an hour ago, turning the October afternoon into a gray wash of brake lights and impatience. Marcus squinted through the windshield wipers that moved more like arthritic fingers than precision tools, leaving streaks across his view of Interstate 285. He was rehearsing his explanation to Tyler, another, maybe next time, conversation about why Daddy couldn't take him to the movies this weekend, when something caught his eye in the median ahead. At first, it looked like debris blown from a truck bed, something golden and shapeless tumbling through the wet grass. But then it moved with purpose, and Marcus's stomach dropped. A Doga, large golden retriever, was limping between the concrete barriers that separated the eastbound and westbound lanes of the highway. The animal was clearly injured, favoring its left hind leg, but it kept moving with the confused determination of something lost and desperate. Marcus eased off the gas, his eyes darting between the dog and the wall of traffic bearing down from behind. Cars were flying past at 65 miles per hour, their drivers focused on getting home, not on scanning for obstacles that shouldn't be there. The retriever reached the edge of the roadway and hesitated, its head turning left and right as engines roared past like thunder. "No, no, no," Marcus muttered, pulling into the right lane. He could see what was about to happen. The dog was going to bolt across the asphalt, and in this weather, with visibility down and reaction times compromised, it would be a miracle if it made it to the other side. He glanced at the clock again. 4:51. Tyler would be waiting, wondering where his dad was. Maybe watching the other kids get picked up on time by parents who had their lives together. But the dog took a tentative step onto the highway. Marcus hit his hazard lights and swerved onto the shoulder, gravel spraying behind his tires as he came to a stop. Behind him, a horn blared, someone annoyed at his sudden maneuver. He threw the truck in park and jumped out, the rain hitting his face like cold needles. The retriever was now halfway across the first lane, moving in an awkward 3-legged gait that made Marcus's chest tighten. "Hey!" he shouted over the traffic noise, though he knew the dog couldn't hear him above the din. A sedan swerved around the animal, its driver laying on the horn, and Marcus broke into a run. The asphalt was slick under his work boots, and his Neath, one he'd wrecked falling off a scaffold 2 years ago, protested with each stride. But he kept moving, waving his arms at oncoming traffic while keeping his eyes locked on the dog. The retriever had stopped in the center lane, overwhelmed by the noise and motion. Its golden coat was matted with rain and road grime, but even from a distance, Marcus could tell this wasn't some abandoned stray. The dog was well fed, its fur thick and healthy beneath the dirt. Someone was looking for this animal, someone who cared enough to keep it groomed and loved. A delivery truck approached in the far lane, its driver apparently oblivious to the situation. Marcus didn't think he just moved, sprinting directly into the path of traffic with his hands raised. The truck's air brakes hissed as the driver hit them hard, and Marcus felt the displacement of air as the vehicle shuddered to a stop just feet away. Other cars began stopping too, their hazard lights creating a pulsing constellation of amber warnings. The retriever looked up at Marcus with dark, frightened eyes, panting heavily. There was intelligence there, and pain, and something that looked almost like relief. Marcus approached slowly, his hands open and extended. "Easy, boy," he said, his voice gentle despite the chaos around them. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dog didn't run. Instead, it sank down onto its belly, exhausted, and let Marcus reach for its collar. The leather was expensive Italian maybe, with brass hardware that caught what little light filtered through the clouds. No tags though. No phone number, no address, nothing to indicate where this animal belonged. Marcus scooped the retriever into his arms, surprised by how heavy it was, at least 70 pounds of dead weight and wet fur. The dog whimpered as Marcus lifted it, and he felt something warm and sticky on his hands. Blood seeping through the golden coat from somewhere along the animal's left side. The injury looked fresh, probably from trying to navigate the concrete barriers in the median. "You're okay," Marcus whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the dog or himself. "We're going to get you help." The walk back to his truck felt like a mile, though it couldn't have been more than 50 yards. The retriever was heavy and awkward to carry, and Marcus's knee was screaming by the time he reached the passenger side. He managed to get the door open one-handed and settled the dog on the seat, using an old hoodie from behind the seat to cushion it. The animal looked up at him with those same dark eyes, and Marcus felt something twist in his chestnut pain. Exactly, but recognition. This was someone's family, someone's best friend, and it was hurt and alone. Traffic was beginning to move again, drivers eager to leave the disruption behind them. Marcus climbed back into the truck, his clothes soaked through, and checked the clock. 5:07. He was going to be late for Tyler, no question about it. The after-school program would charge him the $10 fee, and he'd have to endure the sympathetic but tired look from Mrs. Patterson, who ran the program and had probably seen this scenario play out with other struggling parents too many times to count. But as he looked at the dog, which had closed its eyes but was still breathing steadily, Marcus knew he couldn't just drive to Tyler's school and pretend this hadn't happened. The animal needed medical attention, and soon. The blood was still seeping through its coat, and Marcus could see it favoring that injured leg even while lying down. He pulled out his phone and called the school, his hands leaving damp prints on the screen. "Sunset Elementary Aftercare, this is Janet." "Hi, this is Marcus Rivera. I'm going to be late picking up Tyler, maybe 30-40 minutes. I know about the fee. I'll pay it when I get there." "Oh, hi, Mr. Rivera. Is everything okay?" "Tyler was asking about you." Marcus looked at the dog, which had opened its eyes again and was watching him with what seemed like gratitude. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just got held up with something important. Tell Tyler I'll be there soon, okay?" "Of course. Drive safely in this weather." Marcus ended the call and sat for a moment in the driver's seat, listening to the rain drum against the roof of the truck. The smart thing to do would be to take the dog to the nearest animal shelter and let them handle it. They had resources, veterinary contacts, ways to find the owner that didn't involve draining his already empty bank account. But shelters were overcrowded, and injured animals without identification sometimes didn't get the immediate care they needed. Sometimes they didn't get care at all. He thought about Tyler, who had been asking for a pet for months, specifically a dog, because his friend Jake had a beagle that could do tricks and sleep at the foot of his bed. Marcus had explained, gently, that pets cost money they didn't have. Food, veterinary bills, supplies, it all added up, and they were already cutting corners on groceries just to keep the lights on. Tyler had accepted it with the resigned understanding of a 7-year-old who was learning too early that no was often just another word for "we can't afford it." But this wasn't about getting Tyler a pet. This was about doing what was right, regardless of the cost. Marcus put the truck in drive and pulled back onto the highway, heading for the only veterinary clinic he knew by name, Riverside Animal Hospital, about 10 minutes away. He'd driven past it dozens of times on his way to job sites, back when he had steady work. The building always looked clean and professional, with a parking lot full of SUVs and luxury sedans that suggested the clientele could afford whatever treatment their pets needed. The retriever stirred as they took the exit ramp, lifting its head to look out the windshield. Despite its injury, there was an alertness in its expression that spoke to good breeding and careful training. This wasn't a dog that had spent time on the streets or learned to fend for itself. Someone had loved this animal, had invested time and money in making sure it was healthy and well socialized. Someone was probably frantic with worry right now, calling shelters and posting on social media, desperately hoping their beloved pet would find its way home. The parking lot at Riverside Animal Hospital was half full despite the late hour, and Marcus felt a familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach as he pulled into a space near the entrance. Through the large windows, he could see a clean, modern waiting room with comfortable chairs and magazines arranged on glass tables. Everything about the place screamed expensive, from the polished floors to the flat-screen TV playing what looked like educational videos about pet nutrition. Marcus turned off the engine and looked at the dog, which was still awake and alert despite its obvious discomfort. "Here's the thing," he said quietly, as if the animal could understand him. "I don't have money for this. I have some money, but not the kind they're probably going to want for whatever you need. But I can't just leave you here bleeding, either." The retriever's tail moved slightly, not quite a wag, but acknowledgement of his voice. Marcus reached over and scratched behind its ears, surprised by how soft the fur was, despite being matted with rain and road dirt. "So here's what we're going to do," he continued. "We're going to walk in there, and I'm going to tell them what happened, and we're going to figure it out. Maybe they can work with me on a payment plan, or maybe they know someone who can help, but we're going to try, okay?" The dog looked at him with those dark, trusting eyes, and Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a familiar coat. It was the same feeling he'd had in the delivery room 7 years ago when Tyler had been placed in his arms for the first time, the sudden, overwhelming knowledge that someone else's well-being now depended entirely on his choices. He got out of the truck and walked around to the passenger side, where the retriever was waiting patiently. The animal was heavier than it had seemed on the highway, dead weight and soggy fur that soaked through Marcus's shirt as he lifted it. His knee protested again, but he ignored the pain and headed for the clinic entrance. The automatic doors opened with a soft whoosh, and Marcus stepped into air conditioning and fluorescent lighting that felt harsh after the gray afternoon outside. The waiting room was exactly what he'd expected: immaculate and expensive, with pet-related artwork on the walls, and a reception desk that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. Several other pet owners sat in the comfortable chairs, their animals in carriers or on leashes, all of them looking far more put together than Marcus felt in his damp work clothes and muddy boots. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and scrubs covered in cartoon cats, looked up from her computer screen as Marcus approached. Her expression shifted from professional friendliness to concern as she took in the sight of the bleeding dog in his arms. "Oh my goodness," she said, standing quickly. "What happened?" "I found him on the highway," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "He's hurt, and I don't know who he belongs to." No tags on his collar. The receptionist was already reaching for the phone. "Let me get Dr. Martinez right away. Can you bring him back to exam room 3? She led Marcus through a door marked "Staff Only" and down a short hallway, lined with examination rooms. Room 3 was small but well-equipped, with a stainless steel table in the center and cabinets full of medical supplies along the walls. Marcus carefully placed the retriever on the table, where it immediately lay down, apparently exhausted from the ordeal. "Dr. Saimavaders." Martinez appeared within minutes, a middle-aged Hispanic woman, with kind eyes and gentle hands that moved expertly over the dog's body, checking for injuries. She found the source of the bleeding quickly, a deep gash along the animal's left side, probably from scraping against the concrete median barrier. "He's going to need stitches," she said, her voice calm and professional. "And I want to do some x-rays to make sure there's no internal damage. The good news is that nothing feels obviously broken, and his vitals are stable." Marcus nodded, though his stomach was already churning with worry about the cost. "How much are we talking about?" Dr. Martinez glanced at him, taking in his work clothes and the uncertainty in his voice. For the stitches, x-rays, and overnight observation, probably around $600. That's if we don't find anything else that needs attention. $600. Marcus felt the number hit him like a physical blow. It might as well have been 6,000. He had maybe $80 in his checking account, and that was supposed to last until he found work. Tyler needed new shoes, their rent was due in 2 weeks, and the electric bill was already past due. Marcus started, then stopped. The words felt thick in his throat. I don't have that kind of money. I found him on the highway, and I couldn't just leave him there, but I'm not his owner. I don't even know who is. Dr. Martinez's expression softened. Have you checked to see if he's microchipped? Most dogs like this are registered. She produced a small device that looked like a handheld scanner and ran it over the retriever's shoulders and neck. After a moment, it beeped, and she smiled. There we go. He's chipped, and the registration is current. She walked over to a computer terminal and typed in a number from the scanner's display. The owner is listed as Sarah Chen, and there's a local address and phone number. Let me give her a call. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed immediately by a new kind of anxiety. The owner would want to know what had happened, how her dog had ended up injured on a busy highway. She might have questions Marcus couldn't answer, might blame him for not acting sooner or for not preventing the injury in the first place. Dr. Martinez dialed the number and waited, her expression growing more concerned with each ring. Finally, she left a voicemail. Miss Chen, this is Dr. Martinez at Riverside Animal Hospital. We have your golden retriever here. He was brought in by a good Samaritan who found him injured on the highway. He's stable, but he does need medical attention. Please call us back as soon as you get this message. She hung up and turned back to Marcus. Sometimes people don't answer unknown numbers. Let me try again in a few minutes. In the meantime, we really should get started on his treatment. He's not in immediate danger, but that wound needs to be cleaned and closed, and the sooner we do it, the better. Marcus looked down at the retriever, which was watching him with those same trusting eyes. The animal had no idea about insurance or payment plans or the mathematics of poverty that governed Marcus's daily life. It just knew that someone had helped it when it was scared and hurt, and now it was somewhere safe and warm. What if she doesn't call back? Marcus asked. What if the number's disconnected or something? Then we'll figure it out, Dr. Martinez said simply. But let's give her a chance first. You did a good thing today, bringing him in. A lot of people would have just kept driving. Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed her. It seemed like the most basic human decency to help an injured animal, but maybe he was naive about what counted as heroic these days. He checked his phone again. 5:23. Tyler would be wondering where he was, maybe watching the parking lot through the windows of the after-school program, looking for the familiar shape of his dad's truck. Can I use your phone to call my son's school? Marcus asked. I need to let them know I'm going to be even later. Of course. Dr. Martinez handed him the desk phone. Take your time. Marcus dialed the school's number, his fingers leaving damp prints on the receiver. When Janet answered, he could hear children's voices in the background, the sound of kids being kids, while they waited for their parents to collect them. Hi, it's Marcus Rivera again. I'm at a veterinary clinic with an injured dog I found, and I'm going to be later than I thought, maybe another hour. An injured dog? Janet's voice warmed with interest. Oh my, Tyler's going to be so excited to hear about that. He loves animals. Don't worry about the time, Mr. Rivera. We'll take good care of him until you get here. After Marcus hung up, Dr. Martinez tried calling Sarah Chen again. This time, the phone was answered on the second ring. Ms. Chen? This is Dr. Martinez at Riverside Animal Hospital. I called earlier about your golden retriever. Marcus couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he could see Dr. Martinez's face change surprise, then relief, then something that looked almost like awe. Yes, he's here with me now. A gentleman found him on I-285, injured. No, he's stable, but he does need stitches. Of course, I'll put him on. She handed the phone to Marcus, who took it reluctantly. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was female, refined but shaky with emotion. "Is this the person who found Bentley?" "If Bentley is a golden retriever, then yes. I found him on the highway." There was a long pause, and when the woman spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "Thank you. Oh my God, thank you so much. I've been looking for him for hours, I thought. I thought I'd lost him forever." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. "He's okay. He's hurt, but the doctor says it's not serious. Just needs some stitches." "I'm coming right now. Please don't leave. I need to see him, and I need to thank you properly." "Ma'am, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." "What's your name?" "Marcus. Marcus Rivera." "Mr. Rivera, you saved my dog's life today. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The line went dead, and Marcus handed the phone back to Dr. Martinez, who was already preparing supplies for the retriever's treatment. "She's on her way," Marcus said. "Good, and she's agreed to cover all the costs, so we can get started right away." Dr. Martinez began cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. "You can wait in the lobby if you'd prefer. This might take a while." Marcus looked down at Bentley, who was still watching him with those trusting eyes. "I think I'll stay, if that's okay, at least until she gets here." "Doctor," Martinez smiled. "I think he'd appreciate that." As she worked, Marcus found himself thinking about Sarah Chen's voice on the phone, the relief and gratitude that had been so raw and immediate. Bentley wasn't just a pet to her, he was family. The kind of family Marcus understood, the kind you'd do anything to protect. And for reasons he couldn't entirely explain, that made what he'd done feel less like an inconvenience and more like the only choice he could have lived with. Through the examination room window, Marcus could see the parking lot beginning to empty as the evening wore on. Soon Sarah Chen would arrive, and he'd be able to leave Bentley in the hands of someone who loved him. Then he could finally go collect Tyler, pay the late fee he couldn't afford, and try to explain why this detour had been worth it. But as he watched Dr. Martinez carefully stitch the gash in Bentley's side, Marcus found himself hoping that Sarah Chen would understand what he was only beginning to grasp himself. Sometimes the most important moments in life happen when you're already late for something else. The automatic doors of Riverside Animal Hospital slid open with a soft whisper, and Marcus looked up from the worn magazine he'd been pretending to read. A woman stepped through, moving with the kind of purposeful grace that suggested she was accustomed to being noticed but didn't require it. Even in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the waiting room, she commanded attention not through effort but through presence. Sarah Chen was probably in her late 30s, with shoulder-length black hair that fell in perfect waves despite the rain still pattering against the windows. She wore a charcoal wool coat that looked like it cost more than Marcus made in a month, back when he was making anything at all. Her heels clicked against the polished floor with the confidence of someone who belonged in boardrooms and corner offices, but her eyes, dark and intelligent behind understated glasses, were searching the room with an urgency that had nothing to do with business. Those eyes found Marcus immediately, as if she'd somehow known exactly what to look for. He stood awkwardly from the waiting room chair, suddenly aware of how out of place he must look in his damp work clothes and scuffed boots. The other pet owners in the lobby, an elderly man with a cat carrier, a young mother with twin girls, and a beagle, all turned to watch as Sarah approached him with determined steps. "Mr. Rivera?" Her voice was the same one he'd heard on the phone, but steadier now, more controlled. Still, there was something fragile underneath the composure, like glass wrapped in silk. "Yes, ma'am." Marcus felt himself straightening instinctively, the way he used to when Foreman would inspect his work. "You must be Miss Chen." She stopped just in front of him, close enough that he could see the worry lines around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched a leather purse that probably cost more than his truck was worth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without warning, her composure cracked. "Where is he?" The words came out in a rush, barely contained emotion breaking through the professional veneer. "Is he okay? They said he was hurt, but they wouldn't tell me how bad. He's in the back with the doctor," Marcus said quickly, recognizing the particular terror of a parent because that's what she was, he realized, watching her face. Not just a pet owner, but someone whose world had just been threatened. She's stitching up a cut on his side, but she said he's going to be fine. Nothing broken, nothing internal. Sarah's shoulders sagged with relief, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse. Marcus found himself reaching out instinctively, ready to steady her if needed, but she caught herself, drawing in a deep breath that seemed to restore some of her equilibrium. "Thank you," she said, and the words carried more weight than gratitude usually did. "I need to see him." Marcus nodded toward the reception desk, where the blonde woman in cartoon cat scrubs was already standing, having clearly overheard the conversation. "I'll let Dr. Martinez know you're here," the receptionist said, reaching for the phone. While they waited, Sarah turned back to Marcus, really looking at him for the first time. Her gaze took in his wet clothes, the mud on his boots, the exhaustion he wore like a second skin. But there was no judgment in her expression, only a kind of focused attention that made him feel both seen and uncomfortable. "Tell me what happened," she said. "How did you find him?" Marcus glanced around the waiting room, aware that their conversation was drawing curious looks from the other pet owners. "I was driving home on 285, and I saw him trying to cross the highway. He was hurt and confused, couldn't make it across on his own, so I stopped and got him." Sarah's eyes widened. "You stopped on the highway? In traffic?" "Couldn't just leave him there," Marcus said with a shrug, as if risking his life for a stranger's dog was the most natural thing in the world. "He was going to get hit by a car." "But you could have been hit too." There was something in her voice now, a note of wonder that made Marcus shift uncomfortably. He wasn't used to being looked at like he'd done something remarkable. "I was careful," he said. Though they both knew that careful was a relative term when it came to stopping on a busy interstate in the rain. Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway to the treatment area, her scrubs spotted with blood but her expression reassuring. "Miss Chen, Bentley's all finished up. He's awake and asking for you." Sarah practically flew toward the door, her professional composure forgotten in her rush to reach her dog. Marcus followed more slowly, uncertain whether he was still needed or if his part in this story was over. But Dr. Martinez gestured for him to come along, and he found himself trailing behind Sarah's clicking heels into the sterile brightness of the treatment area. Bentley was lying on a metal examination table, looking groggy but alert. A neat line of stitches ran along his left side, and his golden coat had been cleaned and brushed until it gleamed under the medical lights. The moment he saw Sarah, his tail began to thump against the table in a rhythm that spoke of pure, uncomplicated joy. "Oh, baby," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking as she rushed to the table. She bent over Bentley, burying her face in his fur, her careful composure finally cracking completely. "I thought I'd lost you. I thought—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Marcus watched from the doorway as she held the dog like he was the most precious thing in the world, and maybe he was. There was something in the way she touched Bentley, in the relief that poured off her in waves, that spoke to a loneliness Marcus recognized. It was the same way Tyler clung to him after a nightmare, desperate for the reassurance that the most important person in his world wasn't going anywhere. Dr. Martinez cleared her throat gently. "The stitches will need to stay in for about 10 days. Keep the wound dry, and watch for any signs of infection redness, swelling, discharge. He should be back to normal within a couple of weeks." Sarah nodded, not lifting her head from Bentley's fur. Thank you so much. What do I owe you?" "The total comes to $647, Dr. Martinez said. "That includes the examination, x-rays, stitches, pain medication, and overnight observation fee." Marcus felt his stomach clench at the number, even though he wasn't the one paying it. $647 was nearly his entire monthly rent, back when he could afford rent. But Sarah didn't even blink. She reached into her purse and pulled out a credit card, handing it to Dr. Martinez like the amount was insignificant. "And I want to cover any expenses Mr. Rivera incurred," she added, finally lifting her head to look at Marcus. "Gas, time off work, anything." "That's not necessary," Marcus said quickly. "I didn't do it for money." Sarah studied his face, and something in her expression shifted. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think you did. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be compensated for your kindness." There was an awkward pause as Dr. Martinez processed the payment and prepared Bentley's discharge instructions. Marcus found himself studying Sarah more closely, trying to reconcile the expensive clothes and easy wealth with the raw vulnerability he'd witnessed moments before. She carried herself like someone accustomed to being in control, but there was something fragile underneath a brittleness that suggested her carefully constructed world wasn't as stable as it appeared. "Can he travel?" Sarah asked Dr. Martinez. "I have a car service waiting. He should be fine for a short trip. Just take it easy for the next few days." Dr. Martinez handed over a small bottle of pills. "One of these twice a day for pain, and call if you have any concerns." Sarah carefully lifted Bentley from the table, cradling him against her chest like a child. The dog settled into her arms with a contented sigh, and Marcus felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. It might have been envy not for the money, but for the simple completeness he saw in that moment, the way two beings could be so perfectly necessary to each other. They walked through the clinic together, an odd procession of expensive elegance and working-class practicality united by concern for one injured dog. In the lobby, Sarah paused at the reception desk to sign the discharge papers, her movements efficient despite the 60-pound dog in her arms. "Mr. Rivera," she said, turning to face him again. "I know you said compensation wasn't necessary, but I'd at least like to pay for your truck to be detailed. I imagine there's blood on the seats from transporting Bentley." Marcus glanced toward the parking lot, where his battered Ford sat among the luxury vehicles like a rust-spotted reminder of economic reality. "It's just an old truck. A little blood won't hurt it." "Please," Sarah said, and there was something in her voice that stopped his protest. "Let me do this one small thing. I need to feel like I'm taking care of the person who took care of him." There was an intensity in her gaze that made Marcus realize this wasn't really about truck detailing. This was about something deeper, something that had to do with the way she'd held Bentley like he was her lifeline, the way her voice had broken when she thought she'd lost him. "Okay," he said finally. "If it's important to you." Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if his acceptance had lifted some invisible weight. "Thank you. There's a place called Premier Auto Spa on Northside Drive. Tell them Sarah Chen sent you, and they'll take care of everything." She reached into her purse again and pulled out a business card-heavy stock. Minimalist design, the kind that spoke to serious money and serious connections. On it was printed Sarah Chen, Principal, Chen Development Group, along with a phone number and email address. "My direct line," she said, offering the card to Marcus. "In case there are any problems with the detailing, or if you remember anything else about how you found Bentley. The police might want a statement, depending on how he got loose in the first place." Marcus took the card, the paper thick and expensive between his fingers. "I hope he heals up quick. He seems like a good dog." "He is." Sarah's voice was soft again, and when she looked down at Bentley, her entire expression transformed. Gone was the businesswoman, the person accustomed to boardrooms and bottom lines. In her place was someone who loved deeply and without reservation. Someone for whom this dog represented something irreplaceable. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly, her eyes finding Marcus's again. "Do you have children?" The question caught him off guard. "A son. Tyler. He's 7. Something flickered across Sarah's face, not sadness, exactly, but something close to it. "I bet he would have loved to see you rescue Bentley. Kids love stories like that." Marcus found himself smiling despite his exhaustion. "He's going to be excited when I tell him. He's been asking for a dog for months, but..." He trailed off, not wanting to explain the economics of pet ownership to someone who could drop $600 without blinking. "But pets are expensive," Sarah finished gently. "I understand. It's a big responsibility." There was no condescension in her voice, no hint that she was talking down to him. If anything, she sounded almost wistful, like the idea of a 7-year-old boy excited about dog stories was something precious and rare. "I should go," Marcus said, glancing at his phone. 6:15. Tyler would be wondering where he was, and the after-school program would be counting down the minutes until they could officially close. Tyler's waiting for me at school. Of course. Sarah shifted Bentley's weight in her arms, the dog's head resting contentedly against her shoulder. Mr. Rivera Marcusi meant what I said. What you did today, most people wouldn't have stopped. Bentley could have died on that highway if you hadn't been there. Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Anyone would have done the same thing. Sarah shook her head slowly. No, they wouldn't have. I know because I've spent most of my adult life around people who wouldn't risk their manicures to help someone in need, let alone risk their lives for a stranger's dog. There was a bitterness in her voice that surprised Marcus, a glimpse of disillusionment that sat oddly with her obvious success. He found himself wondering what kind of world she lived in, what kind of people she surrounded herself with. That simple human decency seemed so remarkable to her. Well, he said, not sure how to respond to that. I'm glad I could help. They walked toward the exit together, the automatic doors sliding open to reveal the parking lot, where a black town car waited beside Marcus's truck. The contrast was stark professional driver in a pressed uniform holding an umbrella, versus rust spots and a driver's side mirror held on with electrical tape. Sarah's driver stepped forward as they approached, taking in the situation with the practiced discretion of someone accustomed to unusual circumstances. Ms. Chen, shall I prepare a space for Bentley? Please, David, and keep the ride as smooth as possible. He's had a difficult day. Marcus watched as the driver efficiently arranged blankets in the back seat, creating a comfortable nest for the injured dog. Everything about the interaction spoke to a level of service he'd only seen in movies, the kind of life where someone anticipated your needs before you voiced them, where comfort and convenience were taken for granted. Sarah settled Bentley into the car, murmuring soft reassurances as she positioned him carefully to avoid pressure on his stitches. The dog's tail thumped weakly against the leather seats, and Marcus could see the profound relief in Sarah's posture as she satisfied herself that her companion was safe. She straightened and turned back to Marcus, her professional composure sliding back into place like armor, but not quite completely. Something had changed in the way she looked at him, something that suggested this encounter had affected her more deeply than a simple rescue story usually would. I know this might sound strange, she said, hesitating for the first time since she'd arrived at the clinic. But would you mind if I asked you something personal? Marcus shifted his weight, unsure what to expect. I guess that depends on what it is. What do you do for work? I mean, what's your profession? Construction? Marcus said, then felt compelled to add, when there's work to be had. Been laid off for a few months now. Sarah nodded slowly, and something in her expression suggested this information wasn't surprising to her. Maybe it was the work clothes, or the truck, or just the general aura of someone who'd been fighting an uphill battle for too long. Construction is honest work, she said. My father was a carpenter before he started his own business. He used to say you could tell everything you needed to know about a man by watching him work with his hands. There was a warmth in her voice when she mentioned her father, but also a distance that suggested he was no longer around to share his wisdom. Marcus found himself curious about Sarah's story, about how someone went from being a carpenter's daughter to running a development company, but it didn't seem like the right time to ask. Tyler's probably wondering if I forgot about him, Marcus said, glancing toward his truck. I should really go. Of course. Sarah paused, then reached into her purse again, pulling out what looked like several folded bills. For the late pickup fee at his school. Please don't argue it's my fault you were delayed. Marcus stared at the money in her outstretched hand, his pride warring with the practical reality that $10 mattered in his current situation. The bills looked crisp and new, probably more than was necessary for a simple late fee. I can't take that, he said finally. I made the choice to stop. You don't owe me anything for doing what was right. Sarah's hand remained extended, her expression patient but determined. You made a choice that cost you time and money. You probably couldn't afford to lose. The least I can do is make sure that choice doesn't hurt your family. The word family hit Marcus harder than he expected. It wasn't that Sarah was wrong, Tyler was his family, the most important person in his world. But it had been a long time since anyone outside their small circle had acknowledged that truth, had recognized that his choices rippled out to affect someone who depended on him completely. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. "About the late fee?" Sarah's expression softened. "Because you checked your phone 3 times while we were in the clinic, and each time you looked a little more worried. Because you're wearing work clothes on a weekday but you were driving home from somewhere at 5 o'clock. Because when I asked about your son, you got the same look I imagine I had when I thought I'd lost Bentley." Marcus stared at her, surprised by how much she'd observed and understood in such a short time. It was unsettling to be read so accurately by a stranger, but it was also oddly comforting to be seen so clearly. "You're very observant," he said. "It's part of my job," Sarah replied, but there was something in her tone that suggested it was more than professional habit. "I spend a lot of time reading people, figuring out what they need, what motivates them. It's a useful skill in business." "And what do you think motivates me?" Marcus asked, surprising himself with the question. Sarah considered this for a moment, her dark eyes studying his face with the same intensity she'd brought to their entire conversation. "Love," she said finally. "Everything you've done today, stopping for Bentley, bringing him to the clinic, staying with him until I arrived, it all comes from the same place. You know what it feels like to love something so much that you do anything to protect it." The observation was so accurate, so precisely aimed at the core of who he was, that Marcus felt momentarily exposed. He thought about Tyler waiting at the school, probably pressed against a window watching for the familiar shape of his father's truck. He thought about the times he'd gone without lunch so Tyler could have seconds at dinner, the way he'd taught himself to cut hair so they wouldn't have to pay for barbershop visits, the countless small sacrifices that added up to a life built around someone else's needs. "Yeah," he said simply. "I guess I do." Sarah smiled then, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. Gone was the polished businesswoman, replaced by someone warmer and more accessible, someone who understood the weight of loving something more than yourself. "Then you understand why I can't just say thank you and walk away," she said. "Bentley isn't just my dog, Marcus. He's my family. He's the only family I have left." There was a loneliness in those words that hit Marcus like a physical blow. He looked at Sarah, successful, composed, clearly wealthy, and saw something he recognized from his own mirror on the worst days. She was alone in a way that had nothing to do with how many people surrounded her, alone in the way that only comes from having no one who needed you to come home safe. "The money?" she said, still holding out the folded bills. "It's not charity. It's gratitude. It's acknowledgement that what you did today mattered, not just to Bentley but to the only person in the world who loves him." Marcus took the money then, not because he needed it, though he did, but because he understood that refusing it would diminish something important for Sarah. She needed to feel like she'd taken care of the person who'd taken care of what mattered most to her. "Thank you," he said, the words carrying more weight than they usually did. Sarah nodded, her satisfaction evident. "Thank you for giving me my family back." She climbed into the town car then, settling beside Bentley, who immediately pressed against her side, like he was afraid she might disappear again. Through the window, Marcus could see her hand stroking the dog's fur in slow, repetitive motions, the kind of unconscious comfort gesture parents made with sleeping children. The car pulled away smoothly, disappearing into the early evening traffic, leaving Marcus standing alone in the parking lot with more questions than answers. He looked down at the money in his hand, 3 $20 bills, far more than necessary for a $10 late fee, and felt the weight of an encounter that had somehow become more significant than a simple good deed. As he climbed into his truck, Marcus found himself thinking about Sarah's last words, about the way she'd called Bentley her only family. It made him wonder what her life looked like beyond the expensive clothes and professional success, whether she went home to an empty house where no one waited for her return, no one depended on her presence for comfort and security. The engine turned over reluctantly, and Marcus pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward Tyler's school. In the rearview mirror, he could see the lights of Riverside Animal Hospital growing smaller, but the memory of Sarah's gratitude lingered, along with the strange sense that this wasn't the end of their story, but the beginning of something neither of them had expected. 20 minutes later, when he pulled into the school parking lot and saw Tyler's face light up at the window, Marcus understood exactly what Sarah had meant about family, and for the first time in months, he felt like maybe the universe was trying to tell him something about the unpredictable ways that doing the right thing could change everything. Marcus was elbow deep in the kitchen sink, wrestling with a stubborn drain clog, when the knock came at his apartment door. It was the kind of confident, purposeful knock that didn't belong in Building C of Meadowbrook Gardens, the kind that usually meant bad news. Landlords checking for lease violations, social workers with clipboards, debt collectors with final notices. He'd learned to recognize the difference between desperate knocks and authoritative ones, and this definitely fell into the latter category. Tyler was sprawled on the living room floor, surrounded by homework sheets and colored pencils, working on a book report about a dog named Shiloh. He'd been talking non-stop about Bentley since Marcus had told him about the highway rescue 3 days ago, incorporating the story into everything from math word problems to his journal entries for school. The boy looked up from his assignment with the bright curiosity of someone who still expected visitors to bring good news. "I'll get it," Tyler announced, scrambling to his feet. "Wait," Marcus said, pulling his hands from the greasy water and grabbing a dish towel. "Let me check first." The apartment had a security chain and a peephole that actually worked small mercies in a complex where most amenities had given up years ago. Marcus peered through the tiny lens and blinked in confusion. Sarah Chen stood in the hallway, looking as polished and out of place as a diamond in a toolbox. She wore a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than his monthly rent, and her hair was pulled back in a way that suggested she'd come straight from some important meeting. In her hands were several bags from stores Marcus recognized but had never shopped in the kind of places where they offered you sparkling water while you browsed. Marcus unlatched the chain and opened the door, acutely aware of the contrast between Sarah's elegant presence and his own appearance. He was wearing a faded Falcons t-shirt with a small hole near the collar and jeans that had seen better decades. His hands still smelled like drain cleaner despite his quick attempt to wash them. "Miss Chen," he said, surprise evident in his voice, "what are you doing here?" Sarah smiled, but there was something nervous in her expression, like she wasn't entirely sure of her welcome. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to thank you again, and I brought a few things for Tyler. Is this a bad time?" Behind Marcus, Tyler had appeared at his elbow, eyes wide with curiosity. The boy took in Sarah's appearance with the unfiltered assessment of childhood, clearly recognizing that this was someone special, even if he couldn't quite place why. "Is this the lady with the hurt dog?" Tyler asked, his voice carrying the excitement of someone meeting a character from a favorite story. "This is Miss Chen," Marcus said, stepping aside to let her enter. "Her dog is Bentley, the one I told you about." Tyler's face lit up like Christmas morning. "How is he? Is he better? Did the stitches hurt? Can I see him sometime?" Sarah laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine, transforming her face in a way that made her seem more accessible. "He's much better, thank you for asking. The stitches come out next week, and he's already trying to run around like nothing happened. Dogs are remarkably resilient." She handed one of her bags to Tyler, who accepted it with the reverence usually reserved for birthday presents. "This is for you, for being so understanding about your dad being late that day. I know waiting can be hard when you're worried." Tyler looked to Marcus for permission, and Marcus nodded, curious despite himself about what Sarah might have brought. The boy opened the bag carefully, his eyes widening as he pulled out a set of books about dogs, beautifully illustrated volumes that looked like they belonged in a library special collection rather than a second-hand apartment. "These are amazing," Tyler breathed, flipping through pages filled with photographs of golden retrievers, German shepherds, and border collies. "Look, Dad, this one looks just like Bentley." Marcus found himself studying Sarah's face as she watched Tyler's reaction. There was something almost hungry in her expression, a vicarious joy that seemed disproportionate to the simple act of gift-giving. She looked like someone who'd been starved for the opportunity to make a child happy, and Tyler's enthusiasm was feeding something deep inside her. "There's more," Sarah said softly, producing another bag. This one was heavier, and when Tyler opened it, he found Art Supply's professional-grade colored pencils, sketch pads, watercolor sets that looked like they belonged in an artist's studio. "I thought you might like to draw some of the dogs from the books," Sarah explained. "Your father mentioned you like to draw." Marcus frowned slightly. He didn't remember mentioning Tyler's artistic interest to Sarah, but then again, their conversation at the veterinary clinic had covered a lot of ground. Maybe he'd said something in passing about Tyler's constant doodling, his habit of covering every available surface with pictures of animals and superheroes. Tyler was already arranging the art supplies on the coffee table with the careful precision of someone who understood the value of quality materials. "These are the good kind," he said with the authority of a 7-year-old connoisseur. "The ones at school always break when you press too hard." "I'm glad you like them," Sarah said, then turned to Marcus. "And I brought something for you too." She handed him a smaller bag, and Marcus opened it reluctantly, expecting to find something expensive and uncomfortable, a bottle of wine he'd never drink, or clothing that was too nice for his lifestyle. Instead, he found grocery store gift cards. Lots of them. Enough to cover several weeks of food shopping without having to choose between name-brand cereal and keeping the lights on. "Miss Chen," Marcus started, his voice stiff with discomfort. "This is too much. Way too much." "Is it?" Sarah asked, settling onto the couch with Tyler's easy permission. The boy had already claimed the spot beside her, eager to show her his homework and tell her about Shiloh and his teacher, Mrs. Henderson, who had 3 cats. "Because from where I sit, it doesn't begin to cover the debt I owe you." Marcus remained standing, the gift cards heavy in his hands. "You don't owe me anything. I told you that at the clinic." "I know what you told me," Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. "But I also know what I feel, and what I feel is gratitude so profound, I'm not sure I have words for it. Bentley isn't just a pet to me, Marcus. He's—" She paused, glancing at Tyler, who was absorbed in showing her a drawing he'd made of what he imagined Bentley looked like. The boy was chattering about golden fur and brave eyes, completely oblivious to the adult conversation happening around him. "Could we talk privately for a few minutes?" Sarah asked quietly. "There are some things I'd like to explain." Marcus hesitated, then nodded toward the kitchen. "Tyler, keep working on your homework. We'll be right back." The kitchen was barely large enough for 2 people, especially when one of them was used to boardrooms and the other was used to cramped spaces. Sarah stood near the window, looking out at the parking lot where her town car waited like a sleek black statement about the distance between their worlds. "Bentley is all I have left," she said without preamble, her voice low enough that Tyler couldn't overhear. "I know that probably sounds dramatic to someone with a family, but it's the truth. My parents died in a car accident 5 years ago. I was married then, to a man who seemed to understand my drive, my need to build something that would outlast me. We tried for years to have children." She paused, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful control she was exerting over her emotions. "Fertility treatments," she continued. "Round after round of procedures and medications, and hope that turned into disappointment every single month. It consumed our marriage, consumed me. David, me ex-husband, he said I became obsessed with having a baby, that I stopped being the woman he married. Maybe he was right. All I know is that after the last failed attempt, he told me he was done. Not just with the treatments, with me." Marcus found himself leaning against the counter, struck by the raw honesty in her voice. This wasn't the polished businesswoman from the veterinary clinic. This was someone who'd been hollowed out by loss, and was struggling to explain why a dog meant everything to her. "The divorce was finalized 8 months ago," Sarah said. "David got the house in Buckhead, the vacation place in Hilton Head, half of everything we'd built together. I got Bentley. At the time I thought I was getting the consolation prize. I didn't understand that I was getting the only thing that really mattered." She turned from the window to face Marcus directly. "Bentley doesn't care that I can't have children. He doesn't care that I work 16-hour days or that I sometimes go weeks without real human conversation. He doesn't judge me for crying over commercials with babies in them or for talking to him like he's a person. He just loves me, unconditionally, completely. He's the only family I have, and you saved him." Marcus felt something twist in his chest as he listened to her story. He thought about Tyler in the living room, chattering away to a woman who clearly hungered for that kind of innocent connection. He thought about his own struggles, the financial pressure, the loneliness of single parenthood, the way he sometimes felt like he was drowning in responsibilities. But he also thought about Tyler's laugh, about bedtime stories and Saturday morning cartoons, about all the small moments that made his life rich despite its material poverty. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't know." "How could you?" Sarah smiled sadly. "From the outside, my life probably looks perfect. Successful business, nice cars, beautiful house. People see the money and assume I have everything I could want. But you can't buy the sound of a child calling you mom or someone who's genuinely excited to see you come home." Marcus nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. "Tyler's been asking about you," he said. "About Bentley mostly, but about you too. He's fascinated by the idea of someone who can afford to take their dog to the fancy vet clinic." "What do you tell him?" "That there are different kinds of rich," Marcus said. "That having money doesn't always mean having what you need." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, as if he'd touched on something she hadn't expected him to understand. "Yes," she said softly. "Exactly." They stood in the small kitchen for a moment, the weight of shared understanding settling between them. From the living room came the sound of Tyler's voice, still talking to the empty air about his homework and his drawings, and the dog named Shiloh, who learned to trust again. "There's something else," Sarah said, her voice taking on a different quality, more businesslike, but not cold. "I have a proposition for you. A job offer." Marcus felt his defenses go up immediately. "Chen, hear me out," she said quickly. "This isn't charity. This is business. I run a property development company, and we're expanding. I need someone to manage security for our projects, someone trustworthy, someone who can think on their feet, someone who understands what it means to protect something valuable." Marcus crossed his arms. "You don't know anything about my qualifications. I know you stopped on a busy highway to save an injured animal you'd never seen before," Sarah countered. "I know you stayed with him at the clinic until his owner arrived, even though it cost you time and money you couldn't afford. I know you treated that animal and me with respect and dignity, even though we were strangers. Those aren't skills you can teach, Marcus. Those are character traits, and they're exactly what I need. Security work requires training, certifications, which we provide," Sarah interrupted. "Full training, competitive salary, health insurance, opportunities for advancement. This isn't me trying to rescue you, Marcus. This is me trying to hire the kind of person who rescues others." Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of pity or condescension. But all he saw was the same focused intensity she'd displayed at the veterinary clinic, the expression of someone who'd made a decision and was determined to follow through. "What kind of salary are we talking about?" he asked, hating himself for asking but needing to know. $65,000 to start," Sarah said without hesitation. "Plus benefits, plus performance bonuses. It's real work." Marcus coordinating with contractors, managing access to job sites, liaising with local law enforcement. You'd be protecting millions of dollars in equipment and materials, not to mention the safety of our workers. Marcus felt his world tilt slightly. $65,000 was more than he'd made in his best year of construction work. It was health insurance for Tyler, it was reliable transportation, it was the difference between surviving and actually living. "Why me?" he asked. "You could hire someone with experience, someone with a track record." Sarah moved closer, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. "Because I've spent my entire career surrounded by people who know the right things to say and do, people who've learned to perform integrity rather than live it. When I watched you with Bentley at the clinic, when I saw how gentle you were with an injured animal that wasn't even yours, I knew I was seeing something real. Something I could trust." She paused, then added, And because Tyler deserves a father who doesn't have to choose between paying the electric bill and buying him new shoes. I've seen the way he looks at you, Marcus. He thinks you hung the moon. Don't you want to be able to give him the life that kind of devotion deserves? The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Every day, he made choices based on scarcity, choosing the generic brand, skipping meals so Tyler could have seconds, wearing clothes until they fell apart rather than buying replacements. He'd convinced himself that love was enough, that Tyler was happy and healthy, and that was all that mattered. But the truth was, he wanted more for his son. He wanted Tyler to have opportunities, experiences, the kind of childhood where money wasn't a constant source of stress and limitation. "This feels too convenient," Marcus said finally. "Like you're trying to fix my life because I helped you with your dog." Sarah shook her head. "I'm trying to fix my business because I need someone I can trust. The fact that it might improve your life is a bonus, not the primary motivation." From the living room came the sound of Tyler's laughter, followed by his voice calling out, "Dad, can Ms. Chen see my drawing of Bentley?" Marcus and Sarah looked at each other, both of them smiling at the interruption. There was something about Tyler's enthusiasm that cut through adult complications, that made everything seem simpler and more immediate. "Think about it," Sarah said quietly. "Take whatever time you need. But Marcus, don't let pride stand in the way of giving Tyler the life he deserves. Sometimes the universe sends us exactly what we need, even if it comes in a package we weren't expecting." They returned to the living room, where Tyler had arranged his new art supplies in neat rows and was already working on a detailed sketch of a golden retriever. The drawing was surprisingly good for a 7-year-old, showing real attention to detail and a natural understanding of proportion. "This is wonderful," Sarah said, kneeling beside the coffee table to examine Tyler's work. "You're very talented." Tyler beamed under her praise, his face glowing with the pride of a child whose efforts had been truly seen and appreciated. "I'm going to make one for Bentley, too," he announced, "so he has a picture of himself when he gets better." "He would love that," Sarah said, and Marcus could hear the genuine emotion in her voice. "Maybe when he's all healed up, you could meet him in person, if your father says it's okay." Tyler's eyes went wide, and he turned to Marcus with an expression of such hope and excitement that Marcus felt his heart clench. "Dad, could I really meet Bentley?" Marcus looked at Sarah, seeing not just the successful businesswoman, but the lonely woman who'd shared her story in the kitchen, who'd looked at Tyler with such hunger for connection. He thought about the job offer, about the grocery card still sitting on the counter, about the way Tyler had responded to someone showing genuine interest in his artwork and his dreams. "We'll see," Marcus said, which was parent, speak for probably yes, and everyone in the room knew it. Sarah stayed for another hour, admiring Tyler's drawings and listening to his stories with the kind of focused attention that children crave but don't always receive. She asked about school, about his friends, about his favorite subjects and his least favorite vegetables. She laughed at his jokes and took his opinions seriously, treating him like a real person rather than a small adult in training. When she finally gathered her coat and prepared to leave, Tyler hugged her goodbye with the unconscious affection of a child who'd decided she was safe and worthy of trust. Marcus watched Sarah's face during that embrace, seeing the way she closed her eyes and held on just a moment longer than necessary, as if she was memorizing the feeling of small arms around her neck. "Thank you for the presents," Tyler said solemnly. "And thank you for letting my dad save Bentley." "Thank you for sharing your artwork with me," Sarah replied, equally serious. "And thank you for having such a brave father." At the door, she turned back to Marcus one more time. "Think about what we discussed," she said quietly, "but don't think too long. Good opportunities have a way of disappearing if you wait too long to embrace them." After she left, Marcus stood at the window watching her town car pull away from the complex. Tyler had returned to his art supplies, already absorbed in a new drawing, this one featuring a man and a dog standing together under what looked like a rainbow. "I like her," Tyler announced without looking up from his work. "She listens like you do, like she really cares about what I'm saying." Marcus turned from the window, studying his son's bent head as he worked. "Yeah, he said quietly. I think she does really care. That night, after Tyler had gone to bed surrounded by his new books and art supplies, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with Sarah's business card in front of him. The card was simple but expensive heavy stock, embossed lettering, the kind of understated elegance that spoke to serious money and serious business. He thought about her story, about the loneliness that money couldn't fix, and the way she'd looked at Tyler like he was something precious and rare. He thought about the job offer, about what $65,000 could mean for their life stability, security, the ability to plan for the future rather than just survive the present. But mostly he thought about Tyler's excitement, about the way his son had responded to Sarah's genuine interest and attention. The boy had been starved for that kind of adult validation, for someone other than his father to see his potential and celebrate his achievements. Marcus picked up his phone and stared at Sarah's number for a long time before finally typing a text message. I'd like to hear more about the job. When can we talk? The response came back within minutes. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., my office. I'll send you the address. And Marcus? Thank you for taking a chance on something new. Marcus set the phone down and looked around the small apartment at the dishes drying in the rack, at Tyler's homework spread across the coffee table, at the framed picture of him and Tyler at the zoo last summer, both of them squinting in the sunshine and grinning like they had all the time in the world. Maybe they did have all the time in the world. And maybe, just maybe, they were about to have something else too, the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a lifetime, wrapped in the unexpected package of a grateful woman and her injured dog. For the first time in months, Marcus allowed himself to imagine a different kind of future, one where Tyler's dreams weren't limited by the mathematics of poverty, where kindness could be repaid with opportunity, and where doing the right thing might actually lead to something better than just the satisfaction of knowing you'd done the right thing. It was a dangerous kind of hope, the kind that could break your heart if it didn't work out. But as Marcus turned off the lights and headed toward his bedroom, he decided it was also the kind of hope worth taking a chance on. The first morning Marcus walked into the gleaming lobby of Chen Development Group, he felt like an imposter wearing someone else's clothes. The security uniform fit him perfectly. Sarah had somehow guessed his measurements, exactly, but everything else about the environment felt foreign. Marble floors reflected overhead lighting that probably cost more than his old monthly salary, and the receptionist's desk looked like something from a spaceship rather than an office building. Sarah appeared within minutes of his arrival, moving through the lobby with the confident stride of someone who belonged in spaces like this. She wore a navy blazer that looked expensive even to Marcus's untrained eye, but when she saw him, her professional mask slipped into something warmer, more genuine. "How do you feel?" she asked, studying his face as if his comfort level was genuinely important to her. "Like I'm playing dress-up," Marcus admitted, tugging at the collar of his uniform shirt. "But I'll get used to it." "You look natural," Sarah said, and there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't just being polite. "Command presence. That's what we call it in the business world. Some people have it, some don't. You definitely have it." The training took 3 weeks, during which Marcus learned about access control systems, emergency protocols, and the intricate dance of managing security for active construction sites. But more than that, he learned about Sarah's business show. She'd built Chen Development from a small commercial renovation company into one of the most respected firms in the Southeast, how every project carried her father's legacy of quality craftsmanship combined with her own vision for sustainable development. What surprised Marcus most was how hands-on Sarah remained despite her success. She knew the names of contractors, the specifications of building materials, the permit requirements for every jurisdiction they worked in. She wasn't just someone who wrote checks and attended board meetings. She was someone who understood construction from the ground up, who could read blueprints and spot potential problems before they became expensive disasters. "My father used to say that you can't manage what you don't understand," she explained one afternoon as they walked through a mixed-use development site in Midtown. "He made sure I learned every aspect of the business, from pouring foundations to negotiating with city planners." Marcus watched her interact with the site foreman, asking detailed questions about concrete cure times and structural load requirements. There was a mutual respect in the conversation that spoke to years of proving herself in a male-dominated industry, of earning credibility through competence rather than demanding it through position. "He sounds like he was a good man," Marcus said as they headed back to her car. "He was," Sarah replied, and there was a wistfulness in her voice that Marcus was beginning to recognize. "He would have liked you, I think. He always said that the best security guards were the ones who understood that they were protecting more than just property. They were protecting people's dreams, their life's work." The work itself proved to be exactly what Sarah had promised: challenging, important, and genuinely necessary. Marcus found himself coordinating with police departments, managing relationships with neighborhood associations, and developing security protocols that balanced accessibility with protection. It wasn't charity disguised as employment, it was real responsibility that required real skills. But what Marcus hadn't expected was how the job would weave Sarah into the fabric of his and Tyler's daily life. It started small text messages asking about Tyler's school day, occasional phone calls that stretched beyond work topics into conversations about parenting challenges and childhood memories. Sarah remembered details that impressed Marcus: Tyler's upcoming science fair project, his struggle with multiplication tables, his excitement about a field trip to the aquarium. "How's the solar system model coming along?" Sarah asked one evening as Marcus was locking up the downtown office building they were renovating into luxury condos. Marcus smiled, pulling out his phone to show her the latest photo Tyler had sent, a papier-mâché Saturn that was slightly lopsided but painted with careful attention to the planet's ring system. "He's been working on it every night this week. I think he's more excited about this project than anything he's done in school. He's lucky to have a father who encourages his interests," Sarah said, studying the photo with the focused attention she brought to everything involving Tyler. "A lot of kids don't get that kind of support at home." There was something in her voice that made Marcus look at her more closely. "You sound like you speak from experience." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "My parents were wonderful, but they were also practical. Art projects and science experiments were fine as hobbies, but they wanted me focused on things that would lead to a stable career. It wasn't until I was older that I realized creativity and practicality don't have to be mutually exclusive." Marcus found himself thinking about that conversation later that night as he helped Tyler paint the rings of Packers Saturn with gold acrylic paint. Sarah was right. Tyler was lucky to have encouragement for his interests, but Marcus was beginning to understand that Sarah was lucky too, in her own way. She got to experience Tyler's enthusiasm secondhand, to live vicariously through his discoveries and achievements, in a way that seemed to feed something hungry inside her. The shift in their relationship happened gradually, so naturally that Marcus didn't notice it until Tyler started asking when Miss Sarah was coming to visit again. She'd stopped by the apartment twice more since that first visit, always with some excuse, dropping off project reports that could have been emailed, returning a tool Marcus had loaned her, bringing Tyler a book she'd seen that reminded her of his interests. Each visit lasted longer than the previous one, and each time Tyler grew more comfortable with her presence, more likely to share his thoughts and stories without prompting. Sarah, for her part, seemed to soak up every word, every giggle, every demonstration of whatever new skill Tyler had mastered since her last visit. "She's lonely," Tyler announced one Saturday morning over breakfast, displaying the kind of startling insight children sometimes possessed. "Miss Sarah. She gets sad when she thinks we're not looking." Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. "What makes you say that?" Tyler shrugged, spooning cereal into his mouth with the casual authority of someone stating an obvious fact. "She looks at us the way I look at families in movies sometimes. Like she wishes she could be part of it." The observation hit Marcus harder than he expected, partly because it was so accurate, and partly because it came from someone still young enough to see emotions without the filters that adults learn to apply. Tyler was right. Sarah did look at them with a kind of longing that had nothing to do with their modest apartment or simple routines, and everything to do with the easy intimacy of people who belonged to each other. That afternoon, Marcus found himself paying closer attention to Sarah's expressions during her visit, noticing the way she watched him and Tyler interact, the way she seemed to memorize Tyler's laughter, the way she lingered at the door when it was time to leave, as if she was reluctant to return to whatever waited for her at home. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" Marcus heard himself asking as Sarah gathered her purse and coat. "Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and salad. But Tyler made garlic bread from scratch this afternoon." Sarah's face lit up with such genuine pleasure that Marcus wondered how long it had been since someone had invited her to share a simple meal. "I would love that," she said. "If you're sure I'm not imposing." "You're not imposing," Tyler announced from the kitchen, where he was already setting a third place at their small table. "Dad always makes too much spaghetti anyway." Dinner was a revelation in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. Sarah fit into their routine seamlessly, helping Tyler serve the salad, listening to Marcus's stories about difficult contractors with the kind of engaged attention that made even mundane work experiences feel interesting. She laughed at Tyler's jokes, asked thoughtful questions about his school day, and shared stories from her own childhood that painted her parents as loving but serious people who'd worked hard to build a better life for their daughter. "My mother used to say that the secret to good garlic bread was in the timing," Sarah said, taking another piece of Tyler's creation. "Too early and the butter melts into the bread, too late and it doesn't penetrate the crust. This is perfect timing." Tyler beamed under her praise, and Marcus felt something warm settle in his chest as he watched the interaction. There was nothing forced or artificial about Sarah's interest in Tyler. It was the genuine delight of someone who rarely had the opportunity to connect with a child's enthusiastic energy. After dinner, Tyler convinced Sarah to help him with a jigsaw puzzly 1,000-piece image of the solar system that had been sitting half-finished on the coffee table for weeks. Marcus cleaned up the kitchen while listening to their quiet conversation, Tyler's excited explanations of different planetary characteristics, mixing with Sarah's patient questions and encouragement. "Did you know that Jupiter has at least 79 moons?" Tyler asked, holding up a puzzle piece that might have been part of the gas giant's distinctive red spot. "I did not know that," Sarah replied with the kind of wonder that suggested she was learning something genuinely fascinating rather than just indulging a child's interests. "How do scientists keep track of so many moons?" Marcus found himself smiling as he loaded the dishwasher, thinking about how different this evening was from his usual routine. Typically, after dinner, he and Tyler would work on homework together, maybe watch a movie if there wasn't too much to do the next day, then begin the quiet ritual of bedtime stories and tucked-in conversations about the day's events. It was a good routine, one that had served them well through Tyler's entire conscious life, but it was also insular, contained, just the two of them against the world. Having Sarah there added a dimension Marcus hadn't realized was missing. Tyler was performing slightly, showing off his knowledge and personality for someone new, but he was also more relaxed than Marcus had seen him with most adults. Sarah had somehow earned his trust quickly, probably because she talked to him like he was a real person rather than a smaller, less capable version of an adult. When it came time for Tyler's bedtime, he surprised Marcus by asking if Sarah could help with his nightly reading. It was a sacred routine, one they'd maintained since Tyler was 320 minutes of reading together, sometimes Tyler reading to Marcus, sometimes the reverse, always ending with a brief conversation about the day's highlights and challenges. "If Miss Sarah doesn't mind," Marcus said, looking to Sarah for confirmation. "I would be honored," Sarah replied, and Marcus could tell she meant it. They crowded onto Tyler's twin bed, Marcus and Sarah on either side of the boy, as he read from a chapter book about a detective dog who solved mysteries in his neighborhood. Tyler was a good reader for his age, but he still stumbled occasionally over longer words, and Marcus was touched to see Sarah offer gentle help when needed, never making him feel embarrassed about asking for assistance. After Tyler finished his chapter and they'd talked through the day's event's successful science test, his friend Jake's new bicycle, his excitement about an upcoming class field trip, Marcus and Sarah retreated to the living room while Tyler settled into sleep. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, settling onto the couch with a contentment Marcus rarely saw in her. For letting me be part of that. I know it's probably strange, having someone outside your family intrude on such personal routines. Marcus poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot he'd started earlier, considering her words. It doesn't feel like intrusion, he said finally. It feels like, I don't know, like something that was supposed to happen. Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the mug in a gesture that seemed more about comfort than warmth. Can I tell you something? She asked. Something I probably shouldn't admit? Marcus settled into the chair across from her, noting the vulnerability in her expression. Sure. I think about this, Sarah said, gesturing around the small apartment. About you and Tyler, about the way you live. I know that probably sounds ridiculous coming from someone with my resources, but there's something here that I don't have in my life. Something I've never had. What's that? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee as if it might contain answers to questions she'd never voiced. Purpose beyond myself, she said finally. Everything I do, every decision I make, every success I achieve it, all stops with me. There's no one waiting at home to hear about my day. No one who needs me to be better than I was yesterday. No one whose future depends on the choices I make today. Marcus felt something twist in his chest as he listened to her words. He thought about his own daily routine, about the way every decision was filtered through Tyler's needs, every choice weighed against its impact on his son's well-being and future. It was exhausting sometimes, the constant responsibility, but it was also grounding in a way he'd never fully appreciated. Tyler talks about you all the time, Marcus said quietly. About things you've said, questions you've asked him, books you've recommended. You matter to him, Sarah. Maybe more than you realize. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she didn't allow to fall. He matters to me too. More than I should probably admit to his father. Why shouldn't you admit it? Because it's not my place, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Because he's not my child. And I don't want to overstep boundaries or make you uncomfortable with how much I care about him. Marcus leaned forward in his chair, studying Sarah's face in the soft light from the table lamp. What if I told you that Tyler's been happier these past few weeks than I've seen him in a long time? What if I said that having you in his life has given him something I can't provide on my own? What do you mean? Marcus chose his words carefully, aware that he was venturing into territory that could change everything between them. Tyler lost his mother when he was 3. Not to death, but to abandonment. She decided that being a parent wasn't what she wanted, that the life we'd built together wasn't enough for her. Tyler doesn't remember much about her, but he knows that most of his friends have mothers, and he doesn't. Sarah set down her coffee cup, her full attention focused on Marcus's words. I've tried to be everything to him, Marcus continued. Father, mother, protector, provider, cheerleader, disciplinarian, and I think I've done okay, considering. But there are things I can't give him, perspectives I can't offer, kinds of nurturing that don't come naturally to me. Such as? Marcus smiled, thinking about the evening they'd just shared. The way you listened to him read tonight. I listened too, of course, but you heard things in his reading that I missed, the way he emphasized certain words, the questions he asked about character motivations. You see potential in him that I'm too close to notice. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. He reminds me of the child I always imagined I'd have, curious, creative, kind-hearted. When I watch him work on his art projects, or listen to him explain something he's learned in school, I think about all the conversations I'll never have with my own children, all the moments I'll never experience as a mother. But you are experiencing them, Marcus said gently. Maybe not in the way you originally planned, but you're experiencing them with Tyler, and he's experiencing having someone who sees him the way you do. Sarah looked around the apartment again, her gaze taking in Tyler's drawings on the refrigerator, his backpack by the door, the general comfortable chaos of a home where a child was loved and encouraged to explore his interests. What are you saying, Marcus? Marcus took a deep breath. aware that his next words would either deepen their connection or create an uncomfortable distance that might be impossible to bridge. I'm saying that Tyler needs more adults in his life who care about him the way you do. I'm saying that you've become important to both of us, and not just because of the job or the financial stability you've provided. I'm saying that if you want to be part of Tyler's life, really part of it, not just an occasional visitor, then I want that too. Sarah's eyes filled with tears again, and this time she didn't try to hide them. Are you sure? Because once I let myself care about him the way I already want to, once I let myself imagine being part of his future, I don't think I'll be able to step back if you change your mind. I won't change my mind, Marcus said with quiet certainty. Tyler needs people who love him, and you need someone to love. It doesn't have to be complicated. But it could be, Sarah said. What if he starts seeing me as a replacement for his mother? What if he gets attached, and then something happens to me? What if I make mistakes, disappoint him, fail him in some way? Marcus smiled, recognizing the fears of someone who wanted to love perfectly rather than risk loving imperfectly. Welcome to parenthood, he said gently. Those are the same fears I have every single day. The difference is, you get to choose this. You get to decide whether the risk of disappointing him is worth the possibility of being exactly what he needs. Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands as she processed Marcus's words. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed, not harder, but more resolved, like someone who'd made a decision that would define the next chapter of her life. I want to do this right, she said. I want to be what Tyler needs, not just what I need him to be for me. If I'm going to be part of his life, I want it to be because it's good for him, not just because it fills something empty in me. It can be both, Marcus said. The best relationships usually are they meet multiple needs at the same time. Tyler needs more adults who care about his well-being and his future. You need someone to nurture and guide and love. I need someone who understands what it means to put a child's needs before your own desires. And what would that look like, practically speaking? Marcus had been thinking about this question for days. Ever since Tyler's observation about Sarah's loneliness had forced him to examine his own feelings about her growing presence in their lives. Officially? I'd like you to be Tyler's godmother, not just in name, but in practice. Someone who has a say in his education, his major life decisions, his future. Someone who's there for school events and birthday parties and all the ordinary moments that make up a childhood. Someone who loves him enough to discipline him when necessary and advocate for him when he needs support. Sarah's breath caught. You would trust me with that kind of responsibility? I already do trust you with it, Marcus said. The question is whether you trust yourself. Sarah stood up from the couch and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where her town car waited. Marcus could see her reflection in the glass, could see the way she was struggling with the magnitude of what he was offering. My house is too big for one person, she said suddenly. 7 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a yard that's landscaped but never used. I bought it when David and I were still trying to have children, when we imagined filling those rooms with family. After the divorce, I kept it because I didn't know what else to do with it. Marcus wasn't sure where she was going with this, but he waited for her to continue. Tyler could have his own room there, Sarah said, still facing the window. A space to spread out his art projects, maybe a desk where he could do homework without having to clear it off the kitchen table every night. There's a workshop in the basement where he could learn woodworking like my father taught me. A yard where he could play with Bentley safely. Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate as he began to understand what Sarah was suggesting. Sarah. She turned from the window to face him. I'm not asking you to move in with me. I'm not suggesting anything romantic or presumptuous. I'm asking if you'd consider letting me help provide Tyler with opportunities he wouldn't have otherwise. Piano lessons, art classes, a college fund that could make his dreams possible regardless of what he chooses to pursue. That's too much, Marcus said automatically, his pride warring with his desire to give Tyler every advantage possible. Is it? Sarah asked. Or is it just different from what you're used to? Marcus, you saved Bentley's life, but more than that, you saved mine. Having you and Tyler in my world has given me something I thought I'd lost forever: hope for a different kind of future, one that includes family, even if it doesn't look like the family I originally imagined." She moved closer to his chair, her expression intense but not demanding. "I'm not trying to replace Tyler's mother or take over your role as his father. I'm asking to be part of your family in whatever way makes sense. Godmother, honorary aunt, family friend who happens to have resources that could benefit a remarkable little boy who deserves every opportunity in the world." Marcus thought about Tyler asleep in the next room, about the science project and the art supplies, and the way his son's face lit up whenever Sarah's name was mentioned. He thought about the loneliness he'd carried for years, the weight of being solely responsible for every aspect of Tyler's development and future. He thought about Sarah's story, about her empty house and her hunger for purpose beyond profit margins and property development. "There would have to be rules," Marcus said finally. "Boundaries. I'm still Tyler's father, and I make the final decisions about his upbringing." Sarah nodded immediately. "Of course. I wouldn't want it any other way. And if this doesn't work out, if Tyler gets confused about your role, or if you decide this is more responsibility than you want, we all need to be prepared for that possibility." "I understand," Sarah said. "But Marcus, I need you to understand something too. I've never wanted anything as much as I want this: the chance to be part of Tyler's life, to help him grow into the amazing person I already see him becoming. I won't take this lightly." Marcus stood up from his chair and extended his hand to Sarah. "Then welcome to the family," he said. "Officially." Sarah took his hand, and when she smiled, it transformed her entire face in a way that made Marcus realize how rarely he'd seen her look truly happy. "Thank you," she said, "for trusting me with the most important thing in your world." "Thank you for wanting it," Marcus replied, "and for understanding that love isn't about blood or marriage or legal documents. It's about choosing to show up every day for someone else's well-being." 3 months later, Marcus stood in the doorway of Tyler's new bedroom in Sarah's house, watching his son arrange his art supplies on a desk that was bigger than their entire kitchen in the old apartment. The transition had been easier than any of them had expected, partly because Sarah had been careful to let Tyler set the pace, and partly because Tyler possessed the adaptability of childhood that allowed him to accept changes as adventures rather than disruptions. The arrangement they'd worked out suited everyone's needs. Marcus and Tyler still maintained their own space, a comfortable apartment closer to Tyler's school and Marcus's work sites, but they spent most weekends and many weekday evenings at Sarah's house. Tyler had his own room there, filled with books and art supplies and the kind of educational toys that Sarah seemed to acquire with the instincts of someone making up for lost time. But more than the material benefits, Tyler was thriving under the attention of 2 adults who were completely invested in his happiness and development. Sarah had indeed become his godmother in every sense that mattered, attending school conferences and helping with homework and providing the kind of patient, nurturing attention that complemented Marcus's more practical approach to parenting. "Dad, look!" Tyler called from across the room, holding up a painting he'd been working on during art class with Sarah. It was a portrait of the 3 of them, Marcus, Tyler, and Sarah, standing, together with Bentley, all of them smiling under a rainbow that arced across the top of the paper. "It's beautiful, buddy," Marcus said, and he meant it. The painting captured something true about their unusual family. Something about the way they'd found each other through circumstances none of them could have planned or predicted. Sarah appeared in the doorway behind Marcus, Bentley at her side. The dog had fully recovered from his highway injuries and had become Tyler's devoted companion, following the boy around the house with the patient dedication of a canine babysitter. "Are you ready for dinner?" Sarah asked Tyler. "I thought we'd grill hamburgers on the patio if that sounds good to you." Tyler nodded enthusiastically, already moving toward the door. "Can I help with the grill? You said you'd teach me how to tell when the meat is done." "Absolutely," Sarah said, ruffling his hair as he passed. "But we need to talk about safety rules first." Marcus watched them head downstairs together, Tyler chattering about his painting and Sarah listening with the focused attention she brought to all of his interests. It still amazed Marcus how naturally they'd fallen into this rhythm, how effortlessly Sarah had integrated herself into the routines and responsibilities of Tyler's care. He thought about that night in his old apartment when Sarah had first articulated her loneliness, when she'd talked about having no one who needed her to be better than she was yesterday. Now she had Tyler, who needed her to show up for art classes and science projects and all the ordinary moments that made up a childhood. And Tyler had Sarah, who saw potential in him that extended far beyond what his circumstances might have allowed him to imagine for himself. The rescue of one injured dog had led to the rescue of 3 hearts that had been broken in different ways. Marcus had been drowning in the responsibility of single parenthood and the stress of financial insecurity. Sarah had been suffocating in a life that was materially successful but emotionally barren. Tyler had been missing the kind of nurturing attention that only comes from having multiple adults who are invested in your future. Now they were all healing, all growing into a version of family that none of them had planned, but all of them needed. It wasn't traditional, and it hadn't come with instructions, but it was real and it was theirs. As Marcus headed downstairs to join them on the patio, he could hear Tyler's laughter mixing with Sarah's patient explanations about grill temperature and food safety. Bentley was lying in the shade nearby, content to be surrounded by the sounds of family life. The sun was setting behind the trees in Sarah's backyard, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded Marcus of Tyler's rainbow painting. Somewhere in the distance, a dog was barking, and Marcus found himself thinking about chance encounters and split-second decisions and the unpredictable ways that doing the right thing could change everything. He'd stopped on a highway to save an injured animal, and in return, he'd found a future he'd never imagined possible, one where Tyler would grow up with every advantage, where Marcus could provide stability without sacrificing his relationship with his son, and where Sarah could experience the joy of nurturing a child without the biology that had been denied to her. It was more than any of them had dared to hope for, and it had all started with a simple decision to help someone who needed it. Marcus supposed that was the thing about kindness, you never knew where it might lead, but it almost always led somewhere better than where you started.